For the first time in a long time, I think the Philadelphia Eagles should have at least a little bit of concern about their defensive line heading into 2024. We'll get into that and more on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. The Philadelphia Eagles concluded their second day of training camp practice today at the NovaCare Complex. Another good day, it sounded like, for the offense, especially Jalen Hurts, who looked accurate, decisive, in command of a brand new offense under new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. Yesterday, the splash play down the field was to Dallas Goedert. Today, it sounds like it was to A.J. Brown in 7-on-7s against Darius Slay. Cannot wait to get real live action football started up. Preseason coming up in less than 2 weeks. Before you know it, the Eagles will be in Brazil playing the Green Bay Packers week 1 Friday Night Lights in South America, which still sounds weird, but I'll take it as long as football gets started. One thing, though, when football has always gotten started in September, week 1, there's always been questions about certain things with this Philadelphia Eagles roster. Do they have the right quarterback under center? Do they have the franchise quarterback? Do they have the right receivers for that franchise quarterback? Do they need help in the backfield? Is their secondary yet again going to be a weak link of this roster? Did Howie Roseman go too far ignoring linebacker? There's always been some consistent questions about this football team year in and year out, right? But a couple things that you've never really doubted, and one main one was that their defensive line was going to have top-tier players on the edge and the interior. They were going to be deep on the defensive line. They were going to get to the quarterback. You were going to win because of that unit. They were going to be able to mask some of the deficiencies of your linebackers, of your corners, of your safeties. And while this year, I still think they have that kind of talent. They have a lot of youth. They have a lot of upside on the defensive line. Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, Brandon Graham back for one final year, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams. I like Moro Ijomo more than most people do. I think he can make an impact this year. They still have a ton of talent, young talent on the defensive line. I will say this is the first time in a long time where we have genuine questions about the floor of this unit. And Vic Fangio's comments in his press conference today, the Eagles' new defensive coordinator, got me thinking about that position even more, because Vic Fangio was asked specifically a question about newly signed edge rusher Bryce Huff, who got that 3-year deal worth approximately $17 million a year. And with the New York Jets, he's been for the last few years one of the most efficient pass rushers in football, one of the best third down pass rushers. When it comes to pass rush win rate, he's been top 5 pretty much all year long for 2 seasons straight, 2.5 years. It's a player that's young, and they paid him based on a projection of what he could be based on the potential that he has flashed. But at the same time, there's been questions about, can Bryce Huff play on first down? Can he play on second down? Can he play in obvious run situations? Can he be an every down player that the Philadelphia Eagles are used to? Even though Philadelphia has run a rotation on the edge, you knew Brandon Graham could play all 3 downs. You knew that Vinny Curry could play all 3 downs, even to a certain degree. Derek Barnett, Chris Long, Michael Bennett, those guys could all play on 3 downs. I mean, the list goes on and on. Haason Reddick, we knew you could rely on in pretty much any situation. Even Josh Sweat, to a certain degree, is a very well-rounded player that's not just a one-trick pony, right? Bryce Huff, although he was elite in the one trick that he did, is the most important trick. It's getting to the quarterback, which in the modern day of the NFL, that's what you should prioritize over anything. It's why I'm glad they brought him in. At the same time, he's been a one-trick pony that in New York was not a full-time player. And so the question has been, will he be able to live up to that $17 million a year contract and be the ceiling player that Philadelphia is paying? Because, I say this about Jordan Davis. If Jordan Davis is just an elite run stopper, that's a really good football player. As a nose tackle, that allows so many other players on the defense to do what they do best, and it clears things up for the edge rushers, for the linebackers, for the secondary, having Jordan Davis on the interior eating up blocks. But to justify the Eagles trading up for Jordan Davis, he needs to also become a Dexter Lawrence-like pass rusher, at least even maybe a Vita Vea from Tampa Bay. And I think it's the same thing with Bryce Huff. Like if he's a one-trick pony that's just an elite third down pass rusher, that's still a really good, important player in the NFL that a championship caliber roster needs. But at the same time, to justify Philadelphia's contract, to justify letting Haason Reddick go, Bryce Huff needs to become that full-time player. And Fangio today at his press conference said while he believes Bryce Huff has the talent to be that guy, right now, no, he is not that player. It's, quote, a work in progress. And although it's just 2 days into training camp, and Gino for 2 days has been telling me, like, Lou, do not overreact to anything you hear or you see at training camp. At the same time, this is something that's very important that you should keep note of, that Vic Fangio said as of July 25th, he does not believe Bryce Huff is that full-time player yet. When Philadelphia signed him, although he had not done it yet, you would have hoped this brass, the GM, the head coach, the defensive coordinator, a lot of these guys that brought in Bryce Huff would say, yes, we believe he is that guy. And the fact that your defensive coordinator is saying right now he's not that player and it's a work in progress, I'm not saying Bryce Huff will not become that guy this year, but that's a little concerning because, again, you're not paying him $17 million a year to just be a elite third down pass rusher. Obviously, that's the main reason you're bringing him in to replace Haason Reddick in that way. But Haason Reddick, keep in mind, was also a very good run defender. He was also a player that would drop back in coverage at times. Is Bryce Huff that guy that can wear as many hats as Haason Reddick, even if it's not to the same ceiling as Reddick? Can he be that guy? And right now, your defensive coordinator doesn't believe so. And that's a little bit concerning because the Eagles are investing. They put a lot of their eggs in the Bryce Huff basket. And the other baskets they put eggs in are also not guaranteed to be full-time all-around players. Like we know Nolan Smith in this same way has not shown yet at Georgia or in Philadelphia that he can become both an elite pass rusher and a three-down run stopper. Josh Sweat has been a rotational fastball. Josh Sweat has not been a full-time player on the edge when he was asked to be that last year. The first half of the season, he was incredible, but then he burned out. He hit a wall, and he was nowhere to be found the final, 7 games, 5, maybe 6 games of the season. So that's why I'm a little concerned about Bryce Huff, is that it's also not just him, it's the entire. So that's really why this is more concerning. It's because you don't have, if they signed Bryce Huff, but they still had Haason Reddick instead of Josh Sweat, I feel like I'd feel a lot more secure. But you're banking on so many role players this year that have upside, that are worth giving the shot to see if they can be more. But pretty much everybody is in that same category where they're role players looking to become full-time guys. You have so many of those players that you're banking on that the one player you paid the most money to is also in that category, and your coordinator is saying that he's not yet that full-time player. It's a little bit concerning because that's also Josh Sweat. That's also Nolan Smith. That's also Jalix Hunt. We know Brandon Graham in year 15. I mean, he's still going to be good, but you can't ask BG in year 15 to be who he was in 2024, to be who he was in 2016 through 2020, where he's that full-time number one edge rusher. Like that's not fair. And I think it puts even more pressure on Jordan Davis and Milton Williams to not just be rotational players. There's a lot of question marks about if they can take that next step and replace Fletcher Cox, replace Javon Hargrave, be those wingmen to Jalen Carter. And if you can't rely on Bryce Huff as much in the run game, if you can't rely on Nolan Smith, you're going to have to run more 3 defensive tackle looks. So if you're going to run more 3 interior looks, you need to know that Jordan Davis and Milton Williams can carry that load. They can get to the quarterback and stop the run, which is a big question for both of them. So there's a lot of pressure on a unit that, again, has a lot of flash players, but no currently proven full-time guys, except for the one player that's heading into his final season in Brandon Graham. So Bryce Huff, by the way, did have a sack today on Jalen Hurts. Jalen Carter blew up a play against Cam Jurgens. Like the defensive line still looked pretty good on day 2 of camp practice. But hearing that from Vic Fangio is not what I want to hear, especially from a person that really wanted Haason Reddick back. Again, I understand the logic as to why the Eagles went in the alternative direction they did instead of bringing back Haason. But hearing that about Bryce Huff, it's like there's a lot of question marks about this defensive line for the first time in a long time. There's been years where I had a question about their ceiling, but there weren't ever really seasons in my lifetime where I had questions about their floor. And now I genuinely do. So it's something you're going to have to monitor for until really, I would say the first month or two of the regular season. You're going to watch and wonder, like, is this unit, are they going to take the step that Howie Roseman is banking on them to? Howie normally doesn't take this kind of risk at this unit. It's why it's normally veteran filled, but he's doing it this year. And again, he's justified. It's a lot of talent. It's a lot of first, second round picks, a lot of big contracts. It's a lot of investments in these players that you have to see through those investments. So again, I understand it, but there is just a bigger variance than we're used to in Philadelphia. All right, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, takeaways from day 2 of training camp practice. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. But not just the MLB, the NFL season is right around the corner. You can also get tickets to concerts, comedy, theater events, all of those near you by saving up to 60% buying last-minute tickets through Game Time. Plus, you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. They also have a lowest price guarantee. So if you find a lower price on another platform, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first order. Once again, terms do apply. Create that account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Got to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you canvas analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So day 2 of practice at Eagles training camp is over. Some of the big takeaways that I had, number 1 on the defensive side of the football, Zack Baun continues to get first team looks at inside linebacker. And I understand why anybody would get first team looks at linebacker. There's not a proven player. I guess Devin White is the most proven player, but he's coming off a career low season where he was benched at the end of the year, including in the playoffs. So Devin White has been the only guy that's been exclusively being featured with the first team. I get why Zack Baun would be featured, Nakobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter, Ben Van Sumeren, Orion Burks, heck, even Brandon Smith at this point, I like enough to say, hell yeah, why not throw him on the first team? Like, just let's see what the kid can do. But the fact that Zack Baun is being so featured over these players, even over Nakobe Dean, who I have questions about this year heading into year 3. The fact that Zack Baun is getting so many first team reps, like unquestionably so, just doesn't make much sense to me. Number 1, he's not really a traditional inside linebacker. He played both inside and outside in New Orleans, but his best work was as an edge rusher. Like, his best work was getting to the quarterback. He wasn't very good as a weak side Mike linebacker. Like, neither spot on the inside was really his forte. So he's not really a homegrown talent that you picked high in a draft. You didn't give him really a huge contract. He didn't really thrive at this position naturally in New Orleans with his first team with the Saints. You have a 3rd round pick you've invested a lot of time in and risk in, and Nakobe Dean letting TJ Edwards and Kazir White go. You have Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Ben Van Sumeren, Orion Burks, like young guys you like, free agents you signed. Why is Zack Baun, like, maybe he's that much more impressive in the film room, or he's been that more consistent on the field than those other guys? I don't know. Nakobe Dean was also injured and wasn't a full participant in OTAs. He's splitting first team reps with Baun right now. during training camp. Like on 7-on-7s, he's been getting in on the action with the first team. But why Zack Baun is the majority leader in the clubhouse over Dean, over Trotter, over these other guys is a little bit confusing to me. And I know they have, again, 5 edge rushers they're going to want to feature over Zack Baun. So maybe they're trying to find him a more natural or a spot that he can get on the field more. Why are we trying to make Zack Baun work that well? I don't know. Again, I'm not saying he's a bad player. He was pretty efficient in New Orleans on the edge, and maybe he's got a high floor as an inside linebacker. He's a veteran that's smart, has a high IQ. Maybe like Vic Fangio trusts him, but I don't know why they're trying to make Zack Baun work so much an inside linebacker early on. And again, it's very early on in camp, but that's one thing that's been bothering me. And yet again, he got a lot of the first team looks on day 2 of practice. Another thing, the secondary, an update on the cornerback battle opposite Darius Slay. Yesterday, Isaiah Rodgers got the first look at CB2 gigs, reps, I should say, on the outside. Keely Ringo today got the first crack. Rodgers did rotate in 7-on-7s. Still more Quinyon Mitchell in the slot. Again, I understand Gino's logic yesterday of, if Mitchell's going to be the CB1, if he's going to be following receivers, he's going to need to know how to play inside. He's not used to man coverage from Toledo. Playing inside man coverage in the slot with those choice routes will really help him grow his game. I completely understand that logic. But Quinyon Mitchell's supposed to be your long-term boundary corner. I think he should start this year right away. Why is he, I don't want to say exclusively playing in the slot, but why are we making him play in the slot so much? Again, I think Vic Fangio is going to work in Philadelphia, and there's some things I really like that I've heard. I have some questions. I'm always skeptical of a guy like this, and when he's doing things like this early on, we'll see. It's a wait-and-see kind of approach with me and Fangio running this defense. So those are a couple of things on defense. I noticed Baun continues to get a lot of work as a first-team linebacker on the inside. Keely Ringo got the first crack at CB2 responsibilities today. Quinyon Mitchell still playing in the slot. Jalen Hurts, once again, looked great. That's the most important part of, throw everything else on the show I've said out the window. If Jalen Hurts continues to look like the MVP candidate of 2022 that he's looked like the first 2 days of practice with his ball placement, with his accuracy, with his command of the offense, none of this other stuff matters. Zack Baun playing linebacker isn't going to matter, right? I mean, look at last year. You had terrible linebacker play, but when Jalen Hurts was an MVP candidate, you were 10-1 with a gauntlet of a schedule. It didn't matter. So that's the most important takeaway from the first 2 days of camp is that Jalen Hurts looks like he's back. He does not look like the guy from the final 5 games of the 2023 regular season and the playoffs. So that's, to me, the most important part. One other thing I heard on Sports Radio 94 WIP, DeVonta Smith talking about how getting ready for Kellen Moore's new offense, he's watching a lot of CeeDee Lamb tape. And I love that. And that's obvious, right? Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator for Dallas. CeeDee Lamb was their best receiver. Naturally, that's the guy you watch. But I think there's even more of a direct correlation with DeVonta watching CeeDee Lamb than A.J. Brown or any other player on this offense, because CeeDee Lamb played a lot in the slot, and he's very stylistically, he's very similar to DeVonta. Skinnier receivers, their strengths are route running, short area explosiveness, hands. And Kellen Moore loved to use CeeDee Lamb in the slot, to use him on those choice routes as an elite route runner. DeVonta has played a lot in the slot in the last 3 seasons with Philly. But I think with Kellen Moore, if they can make sure that one of these other third receivers can be somewhat reliable on the outside, I think you're going to see, like we talked about the other day, A.J. Brown having a new role in Kellen Moore's offense. I think DeVonta Smith, you're going to see even more in the slot. I think Kellen Moore is going to try to use him even more so than A.J. Brown because of his style. I think Kellen Moore is going to see DeVonta Smith and be like, that's my CeeDee Lamb in this offense. And I think that's really exciting. All right, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show with some James Bradberry talk. 2 teams just lost their starting corner for the entire season. A trade market might suddenly be developing around James Bradberry. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and to level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. We're wrapping up this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles with some news around the league, and it's all pertaining to James Bradberry, I think. I'm not saying either team is going to want to trade for Bradberry, who's an aging, slow corner on a pretty expensive contract, but I will say two teams suddenly, I thought the trade market for Bradberry was dead. The Eagles had pretty much no, I think, what's the right word? Leverage, right? Yeah, they have no leverage in this market at all. Everybody knows they're going to try to move on from him, right? They drafted Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. They have Keely Ringo. They have Isaiah Rodgers. They're not even trying to hide the fact that Bradberry's not in the plans. He's not getting any reps as an outside corner with the first or second team. He's playing exclusively as a second team safety. So again, the writing's on the wall. Why would a team give Philadelphia even a conditional draft pick when he'll probably be on the open market in a few weeks? But I will say, maybe there's more of a desperate team now that will give the Eagles a conditional day 3 selection for Bradberry. Two teams in the span of 24 hours lost projectedly their two starting outside cornerbacks, or at least one of them. Minnesota lost Mekhi Blackmon, who has a torn ACL. He was projected to be a starting outside corner for the Vikings. And Minnesota isn't this win now team trying to win a Super Bowl, but they do have talent on offense. They're not a team that's trying to give up. They paid a lot of money to Justin Jefferson. JJ McCarthy is a high floor quarterback they drafted from Michigan. I do think they're going to try to make a run at the NFC North. And their defense has lost a lot of pieces. They're very young. Maybe for a conditional 6 or 7, they want a veteran like James Bradberry at corner. I think the more likely option now that formulated only a few hours ago is the Los Angeles Rams, who were a playoff team last year. They're more closer to a win now window than Minnesota, with Matt Stafford still a quarterback. Rams projected starting cornerback Darian Kendrick. He tore his ACL today as well. He's projected to miss the entire season. LA could maybe use a James Bradberry. Minnesota could maybe use a James Bradberry. I'm not saying suddenly Philadelphia is getting a day 2 pick for this guy. Absolutely not. They're not getting a 4. I wouldn't even say they're getting a 5th round selection, but maybe, just maybe, the Rams now, Les Snead or Minnesota calls up and says, hey, we'll give you a conditional 7th round pick for Bradberry. We know you don't want him as a corner. You're not going to use him as a safety, right? I mean, when Sidney Brown comes back, even Avonte Maddox is getting reps at safety too, and he fits that position more than James. Fangio even said today, he wasn't even very complimentary of Bradberry switching to safety. He said it's very hard. The number of corners that switch to safety, especially at Bradberry's age, is very few. We'll see if he can do it. That's not a ringing endorsement of Bradberry at safety. One of those teams might say, we'll give you a conditional 7. If I'm Philadelphia, I'm running to the phones and saying, I'll take that deal every single day. So a market might be, again, I'm not saying now it's a guarantee Bradberry is going to get traded. I still think it's more, if I had to predict it, if I had to bet money on FanDuel, I would say that he's still cut before it goes from 90 to 53. But I will say Minnesota, LA, there's suddenly some teams that could use a corner like Bradberry. And there were other teams I already thought could be in the mix, like Buffalo, like Arizona. Howie Roseman has gotten picks for a lot worse than James Bradberry. Who are some of the guys he got draft picks for? Brett Toth, Alan Barbary. I don't know why those are the guys I'm thinking of, but he's gotten draft picks for some pretty brutal players. I think he got a pick back for Jannard Avery, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think he could get a pick for Bradberry still. And I think now the last 24 hours that his chances have been increased for sure, with Minnesota and LA both losing starting cornerbacks. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. One more show for you this week, recapping training camp, and then we got 5 more for you next week. We're not going anywhere. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. That'll do it for today's show. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.